Hello and welcome to the special edition of the In Focus. I hope you're having a very wonderful time. Today we are talking about the movie that is trending, The 600, a film that tells the inspirational story of the honors and the sacrifice, of the courage, the Rwanda Patriotic Front and Rwanda Patriotic Army soldiers through the eyes of the 3rd Battalion that was camped at Rwanda Parliament, previously known as Sende. And that battalion is commonly known here in Rwanda as Rukaga, also the 600. Here in the studio, I have the honor to be, with the executive producer of this film, Richard Hall, and Annette Wize, co-executive producer, to tell us about the movie and the storyline, what inspired this movie itself, and what it means for Rwanda's film industry. Let me welcome our guests, starting with you, Richard Hall. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Annette, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And of course, I'm always Ethan Tashobi, and we're going to be, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at this story itself in detail. Of course, looking at what it means and looking into the details that you're probably not going to see on the screens when you're watching that movie. They will tell us what they went through to put this thing together. Quite an interesting story. But let me begin with you, Richard. What inspired the story? Of course, the film of the 600, and quite a rare title itself, the 600. What inspired the story?
Well, I think this is one of the great undertold military stories of all time. And when I heard about it, it just fit into this category of a David versus Goliath type story. Not only were they surrounded by a far superior force, but they were far away from any reinforcements, and they had a humanitarian crisis on their hands. And they had to address that, and they had to survive, and they had to counterattack. So for me, it's just like a classic story, and I just felt that it was a shame that it hadn't been told in a broader sense. A way for the international audience to know the story too, not just Rwanda. So my intention was to take this amazing story and run with it and see if I couldn't make a documentary and make it in time for the 25th anniversary.
Sure. And how did you meet Annette? How did Annette come into the picture?
Annette is the cousin of my wife.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And a good storyteller.
Yeah, and we both happen to be producers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me ask my producer to give us a trailer of this movie before we dig deep into the details of this movie itself from your own eyes, not from what we've seen so far on the screens. Let me ask my producer to give us the trailer of the 600.
At the mountains, there were a lot of training because it was like living in a fridge. It was very cold. Very, very cold.
Byari bikomeye cyane kubera ko n'ubuzima tutari tumenyereye. Ikindi wumvaga uko watekerezaga igisirikare wumvaga ari bya bindi twabonaga mu mafilime, aho twasanze ari itandukaniro.
Batwigishaga ibintu bitandukanye kuko ugomba kwitegura ibintu byose wahura nabyo.
Nibwo bwa mbere numvise inzara, n'ubwa mbere nabonye imbeho nta n'imyenda ihari. Byasabaga resistance nini.
Climbing those hills, the volcanoes, very hard working environment, but it shaped our future engagement with the government forces.
Because it was too much cold. Others would freeze if you don't make them warm in training.
Iyo twitse amatafari cyane, gashyiramo inkwi nyinshi, hapfa byinshi, ibirokotse birakomera. Nubu bashe kuva hariya ukabasha kuharokoka, nta wundi buzima buzakugora.
Mu myitozo myinshi kandi yuzuye ikinyabupfura, iri tsinda risa n'iritatanye ryaje guhinduka umutwe w'ingabuhamye kandi wihebeye kunga ubumwe bw'igihugu cyabo.
Of course, we didn't have tanks, we didn't have aircraft, so we are just training as infantry soldier.
Kwigisha discipline. Ibyo muzakora byose discipline.
Amahugurwa twahugurwaga mu byerekeye igisirikare, twagiraga imyitozo, twigaga imbunda, tukiga kurasa, tukiga uko barasa, tukiga uko turwanya umwanzi.
barahatubwira batubwira uburyo tuzahitwaramo.
Ni lazima tusonge mbele hata tukonde kama.
You got that. That's the very snapshot of what this movie is all about. Quite an interesting documentary. If you have time, it's still showing at Century Cinema throughout until
the week.
Until
Last night was the opening night.
Yeah.
It was sold out. So 2 show times a day, 6 p.m., 8 p.m. until Sunday the 14th.
Richard, could this be the most disciplined rebel group that you've had in history? Because if you look at even what that very short clip of the former, let me refer to him as the former chairman of the High Command, now the current president, Paul Kagame, telling them that we need to differentiate ourselves from the people, the enemies we are fighting for. Not put racial discrimination or whatever it is ahead of us, but fight for the cause. Could this be the most disciplined rebel group that you've probably heard about or told the story?
I mean, I think it compares favorably with just about any other rebel group that you can even think of that later took power. I think that the way that they imposed an ideology, that it was clear the soldiers were trained not only to fight, but how to behave and how to treat civilians and how to relate to the population, that they had a responsibility. And I think the ideology was clear. This is not an ethnic conflict. This is a conflict to save a country. So it was everyone who we spoke to, they understood it, and this was their ideology. And then you compare it to other armies that have faced great odds and they somehow succeeded. You look at the beginning of the Israeli army when they were fighting for independence against much greater forces. Of course, they had discipline and they had an ideology. And I think that it also explains, why they were successful on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What came into your mind when Richard approached you to be part of this story? You're Rwandan and you're telling this you're having this rare opportunity to tell a unique Rwandan story. Yeah.
You look up to someone who has 30 plus experience in the industry, and in Rwanda, our industry is just starting to take off. Yeah. And so it was a privilege not only to work with someone who has the experience, who has the passion for Rwanda, as well as for the craft, but then also a way for us to start packaging our stories. So many times did I meet other colleagues in the industry, other young producers and directors or writers saying, operation, you're kuri sende, no kuri simple. We need to make a movie about that. Sure. So that opportunity came, and you just feel that sense of this might just be the right partnership to make this happen, and it did.
How long have you been in this industry?
I've been in this industry more than 10 years. Yeah. More than 10 years, part of it in South Africa, but a big part of it here in Rwanda. So I moved to Rwanda in 2011, decided to start my own company. There was hardly anyone to employ me. Yeah. Actually, no one to employ me. My skill set was too specialized. Yeah. So I started working on corporate productions, of course, dreaming of doing more creative stuff. So I would almost kind of force creative content into corporate client stuff, but eventually you get an opportunity like this, and now you start to see that possibly the ball might be rolling in the direction we've been dreaming about.
This is your breakthrough project.
It is the breakthrough project. It is the breakthrough project.
Now, Richard, getting these journals to tell this story, not just survivors, but the journals, they have been quite, they have not been so open to tell this story. Mm-hmm. Probably for reasons they're like, we were many, I don't want to be the one to tell this story because, could that have been the biggest challenge as you embarked on this project?
Absolutely. I mean, as we were filming, we had a short window to film. We had 6 weeks I was here. My director from the United States was here. You know, we had a schedule. We only had so long, and we did not have bookings, even at halfway through.
Yeah.
You know, the survivors, we had good liaison through the Genocide Museum was helping us, and we were able to get people to step forward because they were used to giving testimonies, even though it's very difficult for them.
Yeah.
And then the soldiers was sort of like we just kept trying. You know, we had the you know, the smaller officers and the big officers.
Yeah.
And for example, one of our very last interviews was General Karamba. If we had asked him to be the first interview, he would have said no. But by that time, I think the word was spreading that we were conducting these interviews and that this colonel had come forward and this captain had come forward. And so we had some momentum, but it was up until the last minute that we were getting bookings. And then when the ones who did appear, like Sam Kaka and Karamba, they just added so much to the story, so much authoritative, you know, commentary about what happened.
Because I know the chain here, whether you're the junior officer or the top officer, the chain of command is the same. So you know, it's not always easy to get these people to speak, especially on this film where they're not sure what you're going to tell. Yeah, it's quite interesting, but I'm glad that you got them. So what was the feedback, you know, after watching all this, or even how they got on board? What was the feedback? Do you think
when we were filming?
Yeah.
I think they appreciated the fact that we had done our research and that we knew what we were talking about. I think they felt that this story was going to be told well for the first time, and that it was time to tell the story. Jean-Baptiste, the soldier who cries in the film over his personal loss, it's a very moving story.
The soldier story. That segment where it introduces the soldier story.
That's Philbert Rugamba.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But, you know, I think that they felt it was just time. Like, it wasn't a story that they had told before.
Yeah.
And they actually, and both soldiers who got emotional, they both apologized to us during the interview. But they said, I need to get this off my chest. I need to finally tell this story. And we were honored that in our film, that they were able to share with us at that time.
If you watch the story, this film, you actually realize that there's a lot of the untold story of these our heroes in Rwanda. Are you planning to do something next? Because if you look, they are apologizing. They're like, I've heard this for such a long time, and now I have the opportunity to let it out.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to even tell this story in 2 hours. It's such an enormous story. We shot 80 hours of interviews and other footage. We could have told, all of those stories could have been even longer, and we have a bunch of stories that we didn't even include, that I could make a whole nother film from what we already shot. But I absolutely feel that I hope this opens the door to more of these stories being made. I would like to make more of these stories myself, because I have now information about other stories that we can go for. So yeah, I think this will open the doors.
Sure. Now there's that storyline itself, you know, focusing on the 600, but there are also other, you know, stories. The capture of Ruhengeri, which was the stronghold of the former genocidal government. There was also the high command that was based at Murindi. One would wonder, why didn't you focus on one of the two?
It's too much. It's just too much to tell in one story.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when I was talking with people in the government about our approach, that they actually appreciated a story that had some focus, and they also appreciated a story that included the common soldier, and not just to make it all like very high level and kind of official, but to make it more personal. I mean, the frame on this story is pretty narrow. It's just Kigali. It's just some stories in Kigali, of which there are many more. It's just the 100 days, and it's just the RPA soldiers who rescued. That's a very narrow focus. But I think, like, you compare it to Holocaust films, because I'm Jewish, right? So I grew up and I watched all the Holocaust films, because we want to always remember and never forget. And those films don't embrace the whole Holocaust. They focus on stories that people can relate to. And that's what we were trying to do here.
Being part of this story itself and telling that specific story of the 600, do you feel there's a lot more to be told regarding the rescue operations in Rwanda, of course, the liberation struggle?
There is a lot. There's going to be a lot of work around this. There's going to be a lot of requests to make more stories. Already during the production, we were getting approached by even individuals and families that were here at the time that want their stories to be told. So there's so much. If we don't get organized to do this and document all these stories, we would have done an injustice to our society. But at least this is one of many more to come, and we can prove that there's a way you can tell these stories and tell them right.
There's quite a revelation that you just made over there, but before I come to you to give us the feedback of the premiere itself, Richard, you just mentioned that you're Jewish, and we need to remember and never forget. And how does that statement that you made right there connect with Rwanda's story and the story that you made of the 600?
Well, sadly, there are lots of parallels, between the genocide and the Holocaust. But some of those parallels are happening afterward, where people try to tell a different version of the story, and the truth gets, muddied or it gets denied, and that's frankly it's unacceptable. It's an insult to the people who have passed away, and it's an insult to the survivors. So it's important, that those of us who can, keep the truth going, and let people know. No, this is the real story, and this is why it matters.
After getting the research done and the interviews done, how would you describe the RPF liberation struggle from your own perspective?
Such a big question. I would say it's just one of the great military stories of all time. It's just. They had no aircraft, they were fighting superior armed forces. I would just say it's a great example of the leadership that they had, where they did sacrifice. They're an extraordinary, if you look at, just the liberation of Kigali, what it took, and ending the genocide across the country, in those 100 days, I don't think any armed force has ever had a bigger challenge and greater odds and succeeded, even though the cost was so terrible.
That's true. Annette, what does this mean? What does this story, how would you describe the RPF liberation struggle? After watching all this that you put together and the research that you've done, probably together trying to put this story.
As Richard says, it's so expansive. You meet people, you also have family that were part of the struggle, but it's a challenging story to listen to, and to find that the levels of sacrifice that you experience while watching or even doing research for this story is something that you almost cannot grasp, and you even ask, what drove you? And there was I think I've just concluded, there's just a love for your country, a sense of patriotism that Rwandans, someone the other day said it's a spirit. It's the spirit of patriotism. There has to be a spiritual context to this, because whatever drove people, many can't even describe it themselves who are in it. So I think it's also going to be a journey to try and cover, put definitions around what drove people. So for me, it's a story of passion. Yeah.
Do you think that spirit of patriotism that they had this time is reflected in all that we are seeing in this country and in the government?
Right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's what probably our African counterparts or people admire about Rwanda is that sense of drive that is not necessarily based on how much power you're amassing, or there's just something else that they're like, but okay, so how can we buy this, or how can we duplicate this? And I don't know, we probably need to, I don't know, how do you transfer that sense of patriotism to someone else? It's almost innate, and in a way that maybe even the generations that come, it would be a good question to test and say, is it possible even to the generations within Rwanda? I think we need to do more search about that.
Yeah. Richard, do you see that spirit in the archives, those old documentaries and old archive short clips that you saw, that spirit in there? Are you seeing it in the commanders of today, the leaders of today that were there, around 1993?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Then the Rwanda story is very inspiring. I want to say that I entered this story as a journalist with some objectivity.
Yeah.
I think the work speaks for itself, that the story that we told reflects the story that I see, and I was convinced of it. It was an education for me. But yeah, the Rwanda of today is very much a creation of the struggle from 94.
Approaching it as from the objective, journalistic approach also probably explains why you decided to use the survivors and the rescuers as, to tell their own story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's known as two-source corroboration. When you have the soldier describing the survivors and the survivors describing the soldiers, it's such a powerful affirmation of what really happened.
That's the true definition of based on the true story that we always see in movies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the premiere, let's talk about the premiere itself that night. Seeing President Paul Kagame, who was the chairman of the High Command at that time, and the First Lady walking in to attend the world premiere of the 600, what did it mean to both of them?
I'll let you go first.
Honestly, I didn't know they were coming for sure.
Yeah.
I found out, I guess for security reasons.
Yeah.
And I found out, maybe a half an hour beforehand, and it was like, I'm supposed to do what? And it was like, what do I say, Mr. President, Your Excellency? And so I got a quick lesson in protocol.
Yeah.
I was very honored that he came. We didn't speak much, but I did say, have you seen the film already? And he had not.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, he's sitting next to me, and I'm waiting for him to turn to me and say, I don't think that photo's right, or but he never said a word about anything like that. So that was a relief, and I think he was very attentive. This film is, I call it a film that doesn't let you go.
Yeah.
Because
I know.
It's so emotional.
That's true. That's true.
And I hope that he was drawn into it. I suspect he was. And moved by it, and it's even for me afterwards. I had to thank the crowd. I had just seen Philbert, cry, and he is my wife's uncle.
Yeah.
And every time I see it, and I've seen it 30 times, I choke up, and then so it's hard to. You need time to kind of think about what you've seen.
Yeah.
You're there. I saw you introducing. I was honored to be there at the premiere itself, and I saw the room was full of emotion. People, like they say these days, someone was cutting onions around. But watching the president, in the room, the room was filled to capacity. Quite an interesting one. But what came into your mind at that moment?
I just kept saying, I hope he watches it to the end. I hope he watches it to the end. Because the first time we went to receive him, as we were hosting everyone there for the film's premiere, is he said, it's possible we might have just an hour and 15 minutes. Remember that there was Liberation Day celebrations the next day. Today is a big day for the family, as everyone would know. So it was already such an honor to say, look, they made time for this, and then with an hour and 15, I said, okay, that's halfway, just about through the film. I don't know. Let's see. But as Richard says, it's one of those stories that doesn't let you go. He stayed on to the end, and even into Richard's speech. So it was a very surreal experience. One of the people that we were liaising with at the Ministry of Defense, when we were looking for access to archives, to veterans, specifically the 600 veterans, he asked Annette, did you think that this story would end the way it is today? Because he knew then the president was coming, there was all those kinds of preparations. I said no, but did you? He said no. So it feels this story wanted to be told. It chose who will tell it, I think, and it took it away right to the end, you know.
There's quite an interesting reaction from one of the people who was Ronzen Ruggira, who talked about the humility of this army and how even after your speech, the president, the only thing he said was, "Thank you so much," and he walked out. He didn't say much, but he said so much. What came into your mind at that moment?
I mean, I think he was processing it.
Yeah.
I don't think he knew what to expect exactly. And I'm proud of how the film succeeds on an emotional level, but also on an informative level, that we can tell a military story and a human story at the same time.
There's a lot to be told about this movie, The 600. But when we come back, we'll be asking them rather on how we can, increase our own way of telling the Rwandan story. There's a lot to be told in Rwanda. Let's go for a short break. When we come back, it's more of this conversation on the movie, The 600. Welcome back. We're still on the In Focus, and we're talking about this movie, The 600, a story that talks about, the courage, the resilience of the battalion, the 3rd Battalion that was camped at the Rwandan Parliament in 1993, I guess, to 1994, when Rwanda was liberated. This battalion is commonly known as the 600 or Rukaga here in Rwanda. And we have the pleasure to be joined by the executive producer Richard Hall and co-executive producer Annette Wizeye to tell us more about this movie. So let's talk about the journals. We're still at the premiere itself that very night. The house was filled to capacity. All the journals were in there. Did you get time to speak to them after the movie and get a bit of reaction from them? Annette? Yeah, I was seated next to Majimaji and one of the the soldiers who was, probably his parents were killed during the genocide. The mother, quite a story there. Yeah, the feedback.
Yeah, the feedback. It's one of those things. It's heavy. Not in a negative way. It's heavy. You need time to process.
Yeah.
So for me, I just read a lot of body language that night. There was a lot of hugs going around.
Yeah.
There was a lot of sigh of relief almost, because finally the story has gotten told, and from our part, finally we managed to do a good job, I guess.
True.
So yeah, you'd have someone want to say something and it just doesn't get out. I remember Richard got a hug from someone, said, can I just hug you? But a sense of gratitude for all of us in the room, from both the military and the rescuees.
A sense of gratitude to the RPA.
Yes.
So the journals were there, and everyone, the young guys were there, always going for selfies, going for hugs, and bowing to them. It's an amazing evening. Yeah. That reaction that you saw, after the movie itself, what does it tell you?
Well, I mean, I think a producer, a writer, always feels like, okay, you're sitting in the room with the people that you interviewed. They have not seen the film yet. They don't know how you have put it together.
Yeah.
So that's, I hope they like it is the smallest way I can express how I was feeling. Like, I hope they like it. I hope His Excellency likes it. And you just don't know. But afterwards, it was clear that, they were all very affected by the story, and I think they're happy with how it turned out, and that's very gratifying.
For a young Rwandan like you, watching that story itself and the journals and all the sacrifices, and of course the survivors themselves, and how does it impact you?
You quickly, I mean, at first it was a job, then it became lesser than a job, then it just became, as they say in Kinyarwanda, kwitang, because you realize that this is not about you. You're working almost as a custodian of something someone is trusting you with to do it right, you know, to set the record straight in so many ways. So to as a young professional, you know, you quickly jump onto the same almost sense of sacrifice and courage to, okay, you know, we'll do this and do it well, but it's bigger than you, and it's bigger than even the team. I remember we had to always come back to, guys, you know, this is not just a fancy movie making career. There's something so much bigger than us right now. So again, I kept feeling like I think we just got sucked into the struggle. You know, yeah.
How many people were behind it, this movie?
There was a team in Los Angeles that worked on the editing or post-production phase for a couple of months after we filmed. But during the filming, we had, I mean, including researchers that worked throughout the months before the shooting, including those who were on set, including the actors. I'd say 30, 40 plus people. Yeah, Rwandans. And then Richard, of course, flew in with the director of photography and director, Mr. Laurent Basset. Yeah.
How much did it cost? Where is he about? You know, this source.
So let me just say, if I tried to raise money the standard way to fund a documentary, I never would have gotten it done in time for the anniversary. And I saw an opportunity that would have just be so perfect to release this film on July 3rd or July 4th of this year. It would have so much more meaning. So I just made a decision that I was going to fund it myself, and I'll figure it out later. So I just, it's my own resources, and maybe someday, if, you know, we make a nice international sale and it goes on some streaming platform, I'll be much more happy to tell you the details. But for now, I just said I just did what I had to do to make the film.
Sure. Excuse me. The feedback so far. Sorry, something is joking. I think the feedback at the Century Cinema itself. People watching this movie. How is it?
So yesterday being the first, the opening night, I guess we will get to hear more. We're opening up a reviews page on the website where people can just, you know, literally offload once they're done watching it. I did meet just a couple of movie patrons, and they had so much to say. I think we needed to sit down and have a coffee. But these were young ladies who said, now we understand. Now we understand. Now there's context. Now we see the human side of the military struggle of the military men and women themselves. So I think, again, it's appealing to a certain youth demographic. Of course, those who are part of the struggle right now as well, the parents of these youth, and the feedback is, you know, we want more of these stories. You know, they're already suggesting what else to, that they want to see.
And that actually brings us to the next question of how do we tell our Rwandan story? Because, you know, our story has been told differently, especially when it, we've had people duplicate it or tell it in a very wrong way. How do we ensure that we, you know, keep this trend of telling the Rwandan story in a very proper way?
It's all about investment. The investment that Richard was able to bring to the partnership was so key. I think sometimes even maybe the 25 years of waiting for a project like this to come in full force means that kind of investment or sacrifice into a story that you really believe in. So we really hope to see more and specifically financial investment, and of course expertise, because it's a growing industry. We're trying to work on the skills levels to just be able to get that kind of quality. It costs much more to be able to go and do the post-production outside Rwanda, but again, if we do up our game and learn all these skills, we could see more of an output of high quality international level content, but it's still a work in progress. So investment, financial investment is key, and expertise.
Yeah, I would just say that in a country with a new economy that's growing, funding films and television shows is a luxury. Like in the United States, we have the public broadcasting that finances films, and it comes out of the taxpayers' money. Because we are a country that has so many resources that we can create foundations and we can do public broadcasting to support filmmakers. And that's hard to do in an economy that's growing and smaller. And it's not, the business is entirely speculative. Someone has to have a leap of faith to give large sums of money to make something, and you don't know if you're going to make the money back. Sometimes you give the money just because the story should be told and you don't care about the return, the financial return. So I think it'll take a while for this economy to handle that, but it is the way it's going to increase, either through government or private corporations, endowments, and foundations, is exactly how this industry grew, the documentary industry grew in the United States. And there are not enough movie theaters here to make it financially, as successful as it can be in the United States too. So I think it's going to take the will to make these stories.
Okay, so there's also this issue, not an issue actually. Like I told you, during the premiere, I was seated next to Maji Maji, who's actually very instrumental and the rest of others, composers, the singers during the liberation struggle. And this is art itself. How important is art in socio-economic development of a community, or even in the liberation struggle like this one? That Rwanda was on at some point and still continues to be part.
We had a whole section of the film. We had a section of the film devoted just to art, and then for time and for focus, it just collapsed into a very small set, into just a couple of minutes. It's a great topic. Part. Yes, yeah, it's a great and fascinating topic, and it should definitely be explored.
It can be a standalone film, and I think even just getting feedback from the audience so far is that everyone wanted to watch more about, what was that music, what was, where's this composer? We in the room at the premiere, we had the daughter of one of the composers of a famous song called Turaje, and everyone. Probably that just fired up that sense of unity and patriotism. We call it a spirit of patriotism. And I think the art will be important moving forward to probably keep that fire going. So we should be working on promoting the arts in this area.
Are you planning to premiere it somewhere else outside Rwanda?
No.
The shows and
no, I think what this limited run here is just for Rwanda. The next step will be to get an international distributor, and it'll be a worldwide release coming up, hopefully soon.
Any future plans? Have you started considering working to tell other stories along the lines of Rwandan stories? Could be Kwibohora or Kwibuka.
Absolutely. I have ideas and plans for us to make even a feature film or another documentary, a Rwandan story. I would love to do that. I think that there are a group of people who've been through this experience who are now trained to keep working at this level. And I think that would be really great to work with them all again.
Interesting. Planning to do the same, work together?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's what you didn't see on screen. Yeah. That's 2 hours, and to some people 2 hours too long. But I think as the audience kept sitting in there and watching it, it was enough. But there's so many other things you don't see in the film. We interviewed 60 people. And on the final film, we could only narrow it down to about 27 voices, almost, or 30. So what happened to the other 30? So that's what we're still deciding to do.
Have you explained to them why they're not in the movie?
Yeah, they take it very well. We invited them to the premiere as well. You preempt that. You say the focus turned into a certain way, otherwise the film we'll always need your story to build on other angles.
What was the most, probably, I missed that with, the most annoying part of the pre-production? The highlights of the pre-production, when you guys were still putting this together, probably out on the field trying to shoot all these. What would you probably never forget? Could be the worst or the best.
Well, during production, we did very small recreations, dramatizations. We didn't want to do anything with dialogue. We weren't trying to be a feature film. We were just illustrating what people had said in their interview.
Yeah.
So we had these very small scale, we had actors and we did a few scenes. And the very first one we did was a scene where a militiaman comes into a house and tells everybody he's going to kill them the next day.
Yeah.
And he did the scene and he was really good. And the room was like, when we said cut, it was quiet, and I thought to myself, oh my God, everybody is like really upset or freaked out because it puts them back into that time. And then there was like silence for like 10 seconds, and then everybody burst out laughing. Like, oh, you did a great job, you had me so scared, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that was a moment where I said, okay, this is going to be okay. We can get through this.
So probably people, trauma is still real. 25 years is such a short time. After realizing that silence itself and what people go through during the remembrance time, the wounds are still fresh.
The wounds are still fresh. We had the services of a clinical psychologist, a counselor during the interview phase, and that helped. She was part of our crew. We all blended in very well. She was there for the interviewees, but even for us, she said, guys, you watch out because you're watching hours and hours and listening to hours of testimonies. You're going somewhere, but you'll need to come back to your normal life. This might go in deeper into you than you imagine. But it helped, I think, even what we see in the final film, her being there beforehand, receiving the interviewees, probably gave us the kind of expression or like the intimacy into what people had gone through. So that was very useful. Even during the cinema screenings right now, we have someone there just keeping watch and seeing if there's anyone who needs support.
What was the highlight of the entire production?
It was an adventure. Every day was an adventure. I kind of almost want to go into what Richard was saying, like a moment that you'll remember. It's the time, you remember when we shot this one night in Karitie, in a neighborhood in Kanombe, and we had to shut down the production, and the cameraman said, I am not removing my camera here because the whole neighborhood, this was thousands, well, maybe they felt like thousands, had come to what, they had come for a movie night, literally. So we had to make a quick decision and wrap up and pack, because that was probably not the best decision on our side of the crew. But the next day we went and shot this scene in Mount Rebero itself. Actually happened to be in one of the scenes in the story. And I remember while Richard was filming, I don't know if he knows this, but someone came and he started making calls and said, I am in charge of this zone of responsibility. No one told me about this. But that was the logistical thing that we needed to handle, is how do we keep the communication going, that there's a film happening here, with all levels of security, all levels of, so you just don't know how many levels there are. You hope that you'll plant this communique into this office maybe, and it will spread naturally and you'll get it handled. So I think we definitely learned a lot about, you probably need to do this way ahead of time to get everyone in the loop, because it's scary when you're driving by at 9-10 in the night on Mount Rebero, where there's a military base, and the people waving the flag of, the old flag, and then you have Inera Hamwe, and you have cameras there. yeah, we had to explain that. So we took care of that, and you continued shooting. Yeah.
That must have been quite strange. You know, when you're shooting these films, we of course come to the end, and you have all these old flags, and you have people trying to depict Interahamwe. How do you counsel them and tell them, like, look, whatever they see on the screen should not reflect you on your daily lives? Because I think sometimes it has post-production effect on them. That's true.
Sorry, how did you mean it?
You know, how do you counsel these people, the actors, and tell them that, look, what you're doing, whether you're acting as a bad boy or acting as Interahamwe, would not affect you? Because that's what I fear.
Moving on later.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's almost like playing the bad guy.
Yeah.
How do you do that in Hollywood?
It's called acting.
Yeah.
I thought that the actors were young, you know, generally.
Yeah.
And I thought they did a really great job being authentic. But I think because they were young, you know, even if something had happened to their family, probably they were too young to remember. So I think that helped them get into the character and let go of the character. And I thought that some of them did there wasn't dialogue. It was all like body language, facial expressions, you know, and they were great. I was the one who was traumatized.
Yeah, with us on the other side of the crew.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, we're really going to put two men, you know, dressed in those bright colors on a sound truck and drive around
the stadium.
I
said that's it.
It's like, I hope we don't cause a riot, you know.
We almost, didn't, but I got a call, and someone, again, in this whole hierarchy, someone might miss the communication, and I got a call, is this your truck? We got permission to do this, but I don't know, it's a bit too much. It's in broad daylight, you know, it might affect people in a certain way. So we had to do such things very quickly, be sensitive to the environment.
We filmed at Eto.
Yeah, we filmed at Eto.
In the middle of all the students, and we just took a little angle, and we had also a scene that we did there. And all the time we're just like, I hope nobody's offended.
Yeah.
And like Annette said, we did it quickly.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of the interview, and I want each one of you to describe this movie in less than one sentence, and then we'll call it a day. Should I start with you, Annette?
It's difficult to wrap it up in two
For someone
phrases.
who has not watched it, describe to them probably in a few words.
I think this is the kind of movie that will surprise you. It will surprise you because most people want to know, who the RPA were, especially the young generation.
Yeah.
So it will surprise you to know who they really were and what drove them.
Stand by for the surprise.
I think I would say that it's an opportunity to take away inspiration from a very terrible time.
Richard Hall, Annette Wize, thank you so much for joining us here on the In Focus and telling us more about the movie The 600. All that we don't know and all that they're probably not going to watch in the movie itself. And this doesn't stop here. I'll probably get back to you again. Looking forward to the next production. That brings us to the end of our conversation here, and thank you so much for watching. If you haven't watched the movie The 600, it's still showing at Century Cinema here in Kigali, and of course it's going to be probably available later at other platforms.
Yeah, we'll be making the announcement.
They'll be making announcements. My name is Ethan Toshobia. Have a good one. Bye-bye.